All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Pours with Patriots. My guest today is Captain Retired John Baluch. I've been starting off the quote, so I'll start off the quote I found online. The spectacle of a doctor in action among soldiers in equal danger, with equal courage, saving lives where all others are taking them, allaying fear where all others are causing it, is one which must always seem glorious, whether to God or men. And that's a quote from Sir Winston Churchill. So, like I said, from that quote, you can probably gather that John is actually a retired naval physician, 26 years combined, service, 13 years active duty, 13 years reserves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So welcome to episode 4.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So we'll start off for all you guys that, we in Ohio, I'm not in Ohio, but John is originally from Pennsylvania, so that you probably hate him second compared to people from Michigan. But John was born in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, which is really cool. And I gather that's where you got your love for the outdoors, hunting, fishing.
I did. Yeah. As I was telling someone earlier, I shot my first deer at age 7. People look back and it's impossible. I did, and in those eras, you get spanked as opposed to getting praise. And I enjoyed it. I really did. I had a great time growing up on the farm. It made the same work ethic that I used in the military.
Yeah, that's interesting. My dad actually, he's upstairs babysitting the dogs, but he actually grew up on the farm for a little bit too. And I think that's one thing that definitely the work ethic carries on. And still with him as retired. But most importantly, everybody's listening, this is actually the first podcast where I'm not the old guy. John, you're the older guy, which is awesome. I feel like I feel super young. I know everybody else feels like you're an old timer. So I'm the young guy, not really 50, but that's good. So you grew up in PA. When did you decide you want to go to medical school? Because you went undergraduate at Penn State, and then
it was actually late. I went to undergraduate at Penn State, and then I went to my graduate school, and I got my PhD. And during that time, my grandmother got quite ill, and I thought, it seems interesting. I met many physicians as she was ill, and I just decided that time that's what I wanted to do. Some people would say, well, you wasted all your time getting your master's and your PhD, but it was worth it. I really learned, how to study. I had a huge basic science background because of that, and it made medical school much easier.
I don't know if anybody's ever said that medical school easier, but that I've talked to. That's awesome. And actually, John is a second naval doctor that we've had, which is pretty cool. A little bit different process than Daniel, who was on our first episode. But you went through what at the time was called the Armed Forces Health Professional Scholarship Program.
I did.
While you were in grad school. And it was kind of funny. You should tell everybody why you decided to become a naval doctor, which is always, I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I grew up a poor boy in southwestern Pennsylvania. For me, tens of thousands of dollars was monumental. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to do this. Never ever thinking about the money, never thinking about the time that was invested. And what I found is that the first year of medical school, they actually had at the University of Pittsburgh, a financial advisor come in and talk to everybody. And as they were talking to me, the guy said, well, you do realize how much you're going to owe at the end of this 4 years. And I go, no, I don't. I have no idea what I'm going to owe. He goes, you're going to owe probably $100,000. And right then and there, I thought, well, I'm either dropping out or I'm going to find a way for somebody to pay for it. And so I talked to my dad. My dad said, well, you can join. I don't want you to join the Army. And I said, well, why not the Army? He goes, well, you're never going to know where
he was in the Army. He's like,
he was, but he said, you're never going to know where your bed is, and you're never going to know where your meal's coming from. And so I said, okay, well, I'll look at the Navy. I joined the Navy and have never looked back.
But nobody ever plays Navy. Remember that, John? When they're growing up. And that's cool because it's always interesting because I think that people it's just a different thing. It's neat to have the doctors on so far and why that you're thrust to it. And I bring it up. It's different, but it's all the same as you start to see the amount of service they have. I think some other people that join the military, it's something they know right away. And still today, I still talk to people. I was commissioned in 1994. So there's a lot of people in that time, they were getting in, they did this because it was, free education. They were paying money back. So that it's always interesting to see how somebody does that. And then obviously go on to have 26 years after that is pretty amazing. So 26 years, you've been a lot John, it was interesting. John sent me his military history and what he did and everything. And I felt like I was reading like a book again and you're just going through. So we talked and we had some stuff, but it's been pretty interesting. So you in grad school, you talked about that. You retired as a commander, but on your active duty, you went from being an ensign to lieutenant commander.
That's right.
And then when you went to the reserves, you went from commander to captain and ended up retiring here in the Columbus area. One of your assignments you talked about, a lot of it, that it was a lot of your career in active duty was your internship, residency, and your position as chief resident at Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is now the Walter Reed National Military Hospital, right?
Right.
So if you want to talk about that, so it's pretty interesting time. I remember Bethesda, like when we talked about, that's where the congressman went and things like that. So it was always interesting. So you spent how many years there again?
I spent 9. Yeah, I started off as going there and doing a rotation during medical school. And that was a wonderful thing, but a bad thing. And why I say that is whenever I did that rotation, I had no intentions of going and training at Walter Reed or Bethesda, because most residents are traded between the two. I actually wanted to go to Johns Hopkins, and I got, make a long story short, I did get accepted, but we have to do what's called the match. Well, because I was accepted to the military, because of my grades, I couldn't do the match. And so I didn't go to Johns Hopkins, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So I did my internship at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Really intense. I mean, the physicians now have to work, 40 to 60 hours. I can tell you that there are times, there's only 168 hours in the week. And I can tell you that most of the time we were doing 140 hours. There was no hurry up and wait. It was always more work than you can imagine. So I did my internship there. And then I did 2 years as a GMO in an emergency room. And so the emergency room is in Newport, Rhode Island, a beautiful place in the world, lobsters everywhere. And I have stories to tell about lobstering, and especially whenever you're doing it where you're not supposed to do it. But whenever you're ER doctor, nobody ever questions what you're doing, because they know that sooner or later they're going to need an ER doctor. And so they didn't hassle me at all. Actually showed me where the lobsters were. And then I went back to Bethesda, and I did a year of general surgery, a year of trauma, a year and then 4 years of urology. Most people that did what I did are board eligible in general surgery, board eligible in internal medicine, board eligible in emergency medicine, and board eligible, obviously, and I'm board certified in urology. So it was a long time at Bethesda. At Bethesda, to come back full circle, we do rotations at Walter Reed and at Johns Hopkins and the National Naval Medical Center. All urologists are board certified in adult and pediatric urology. So I did Walter Reed, beautiful, but it's in a killing field. As great education, but in Wisconsin, on Wisconsin Avenue, you could drive down Wisconsin Avenue in the middle of the night to do a transplant, and you would see someone doing a chalk outline of a dead body. So it was a great experience there.
Great place to put a military hospital.
Exactly. And then that's why they took us, and that's why we did trauma there, not at Walter Reed, because we did it at Baltimore Shock Trauma, which is the first level 1 trauma center. And it is a knife and gun club, and it was a great education. And they sent us there so that whenever we go out into the field, we really know how to do trauma. Because at a military hospital, for those who don't know, you only can take care of those people who are active duty, their dependents, and retirees. So an ambulance that if there's an accident nearby, only military ambulances, which there are none, can come onto base. And so you don't really get to see trauma on base. Right. So that's my level of education. Then I stayed in the Navy 2 more years at Bethesda. And during that time, I was shipped out everywhere. I was always going to faraway places, as I already said earlier to someone, on your coin. And it was a great educational experience. I saw the world, but every time I went somewhere, you get just a peek of the world, because you're always taking care of someone. It was never downtime.
I thought it was interesting what you said about, so your time frame of services, a lot of it is pre 9/11. So I think the world changed for everybody that was in the military and people that weren't in the military. But that's always interesting to see how at that level. I remember coming on and I came in 94 and then 99. It was that, post Gulf War, Army, a lot of, everybody there, the experience, the real life experience, a lot of those people were gone. And it was like you said that you were getting the experience of medical people were in the hospitals and things like that. So, that's pretty interesting. But while you were there, I thought when we had a conversation, we talked about what's interesting at Bethesda, if you don't know, you treat active duty dependents, active duty members, sailors, Marines, whatever, mostly they're probably in that area or whatever. And then also one of the interesting things is while you're there, you're also a physician for congressmen and congresswomen, correct? And
senators.
Right,
yes,
senators.
Everyone,
so, yeah.
The president as well. Historically, since Eisenhower, all presidents have been seen at Naval Hospital Bethesda as opposed to Walter Reed. Eisenhower went to Walter Reed. Everybody else since then has come to Bethesda.
So did you get to meet any presidents?
I did. Three.
Which ones?
One, Ronald Reagan, and then of course Clinton and Bush.
Cool.
Senior.
I met Bush Senior.
Yeah,
not Clinton, but
and it's interesting when you meet them, you realize why they're politicians, especially Bill Clinton. And I'm not. This is not a negative comment. This is when you're in line and you've taken care of him, and you're in the receiving line. As he goes down the receiving line, you realize whenever he's talking to you that you're the most important person in the world. Then when he goes to the next person, you realize that person's the most important person in the world. They know how to talk to people and get their attention. They really do.
I actually heard that about Clinton, that somebody had met him, like they I can't remember what it was in context, but they had said they were at like some kind of function. And when he talked to him, he was like, oh my gosh, like Bill Clinton loves me. I'm so important. And,
right.
And then he just said the same thing. He like went on, he was like, oh, I'm not that important. Like he was, but that charisma that like a lot of people say, I guess when you're in politics,
he definitely had that aura.
Charisma,
You know, and I'm actually, my chief resident year was, didn't tell you this, my chief resident year was during Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And so you have to have a certain number of years to be eligible for graduation. And all of a sudden, I may be shipped out and not really get, quote unquote, the number of surgical procedures in urology that I need and the time that I need in urology. So it was concerning. And then the good news was the person that evaluates all of us in the residency review committee was Pat Walsh, who was a prior Navy person as well. And he told us that I had more than enough experience. So it didn't hurt me at all. And as a matter of fact, during that time, as a receiving company, we saw more patients than you can imagine. And I didn't get shipped out to the Comfort. That would be my receiving company.
So the other, we got to rewind real quick. I guess when we're talking about, you said that your dad. I usually ask people if they had any military service. I guess I knew that, so I should have asked you before. But interesting. Your brother served in Vietnam.
He did,
right? Army, I'm assuming.
Army, unfortunately.
Okay, unfortunately. What did he do in Vietnam? We didn't talk about that.
He was a tunnel rat.
Okay, cool.
And what did he hate the most? He had claustrophobia.
Right.
It makes sense.
Match made in heaven.
Makes sense.
Right. And then the interesting tie is that what I think it's funny as we start talking to people and doing these interviews is your dad actually served in World War II, Battle of the Bulge.
He did.
Battle of the Bulge is super important to me as an ex-82nd guy. Our heritage, goes back to that. And actually, what's funny, when we were talking about it, your dad actually served in the Third Army, which was under General Patton. So did he ever talk about Patton at all?
He did. I mean, he really respected he was actually in the maneuver that came from the South and did the 100-mile march in 3 days. And he talked about that often. He also talked about Patton, not in a negative sense, but in a factual sense that our blood, his gut, our guts, his blood, our blood, his guts. But he really respected him. And then in the Battle of the Bulge, he got injured. He had fortunately, he always referred to it as walking artillery mortar go off on one side of the deuce and a half and blow on top of him, and he wasn't recognized for 6 hours. So when you're not recognized in a crush injury like that, you develop something called rhabdomyolysis. And so in this day and age, we just dialyze you and it's a piece of cake. In that day and age, he nearly died. But he was and a neat thing to talk about it, it was in Germany, obviously, and in central Germany when he was pulled back. And everybody there, those wars in that era were honorable. Many wars that I've been involved in are not honorable. And why I say that is the Germans were in the hospital. They took care of him. My dad is blonde-haired and blue-eyed like I was. And they really took care of him well.
Yeah. It's funny about the Patton thing. It just tries to, I try to talk a little bit about my experience, but the older time, you said one of the cool things is you've got and we'll talk a little bit further about it, is getting to treat some of the World War II vets. In my time, I got to run into them, but the Patton one was funny. My first duty assignment was actually the 2nd Armored Division at Fort Hood, Texas. So Patton's division. And I went to my best friend of high school's wedding, and she asked me to wear my uniform, and I was wearing my dress blues, and I was at the wedding sitting there eating, and a guy, he had to be like probably in his late 70s, early 80s, like just walks up to me and was like, "What division are you in?" And I was like just thrown off about it, just like a really pointed question, and I was like, "I'm in 2nd Armored Division." And he looked at me really quiet, it seemed like 15 seconds, and just goes, "Hell on wheels," which was the motto of the division. And he was like, and he just, his whole like persona changed. He was like pumped, and he said, "Hell on wheels." And he's like, "I shook General Patton's hand. I fought with General Patton." And I was just like, and I stood up and I was shaking his hand, and his wife came over And his wife's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to bother you." And I was like, "No, it's great. He's having a good time." And he's like, "No," he's like, and I'm like, "No, it's actually pretty cool." And they went off. And we had dinner, and like later on, you were hanging out, and his wife came over and said, "I just have to tell you, like, he has not shut up about meeting somebody from the second Armor Division. I haven't heard him talk about it in years." And she says, "I wish he would just shut up about it now, but thank you." But it was always so. It's always funny that like that probably feel the same way your dad is. I didn't serve in that with Patton, but the people that did serve with him, it's always there's like that honor to be a part of that legacy that he did, and that's pretty amazing. I still can't believe he let you go in the Navy, but we'll talk about
encouraged
that later.
You did.
Probably smart. But,
yeah.
So back to stay on the World War II thing, because I think that's the World War II veterans are leaving us, and fortunately, like we're old timers, right? I guess we are. We're old timers, yeah. In my time in the military, I was able to meet World War II veterans. So one of the veterans I was, I've met a few in my days, which are pretty cool. You actually, while you were at Bethesda, treated Medal of Honor recipient.
Several of them.
Right. And one you brought up and talked about was General Buckley.
Yes.
Who got his Medal of Honor in World War II. He was actually a commander of motorboat Torpedo Boat 3, I think, or something.
Yeah.
And he received that for heroism and all that during, like, I think it was like almost like it was like 8 or 9 months. I can't remember, like a time frame where they weren't being resupplied, where he was responsible for in the Philippine waters. And it was interesting to read that because I'd actually never heard of him, but you go back and look at it. But one of the interesting things that was cool about it, I wonder if he ever talked about it, was he's actually pretty much well known for actually rescuing General Macarthur.
Right. He took Macarthur and the Emperor of Japan, or the Emperor of the Philippines, excuse me, out of Corregidor. And then they had to wind through all the islands, and they had some knowledge of where all the landmines, or the water mines were, whatever they're called. And it's terrible whenever you can't think of something. But he did that. It was really wonderful. And it was we met many people like this because they were, one of the things about my internship and residency is that we lived in a hospital. And you say, well, that's bad. Well, what was nice at night, you can go home, or it was already too late to go home. So you'd sit down and talk to these people. And in those days, there was no preoperative evaluation. They didn't come in the day of surgery. They came in the day before. So you could spend all your time talking to them. And it was like a history book. You'd hear all these different stories, and, all of them were salts of the earth. There was nobody there that was arrogant. And every Congressional Medal of Honor winner that I took care of or I talked to, just again, would just be so comfortable with who they were. It was wonderful.
Yeah, in my time, I'm an active dude. Then also, I've got in my life, I've been able to meet 5 of them, and it's super crazy how humble they are.
Yeah.
When you talk to them, and I remember one time a Medal of Honor recipient was explaining what had happened, how he won this award, and there was a bunch of 82nd officers there listening to it, and a couple of us were looking at, like, the way he was explaining it was like super bland, and we're kind of like, how did this guy win the Medal of Honor? But then when they read his, the actual citation about what he did was completely different. I mean, he just made it sound like I was doing my job, normal day, which is always interesting when you see those people. And I find that fascinating too. I'm glad to have you on about the older folks, the World War II veterans, because they're leaving us at an alarming rate, and there's not many left. And like I said before, it's like every chance I ever got to talk to them. It's now become the Vietnam veterans, right?
Yeah.
It's a chance to talk about history. And what I thought when I was researching Vice Admiral Buckley, one of the things, I don't know if you heard the story, he actually, when he left and he took over command in Tennessee of a installation in Tennessee, he actually used to dress up like a ninja and infiltrate the posts to see if the Marines would catch him. And he was known for doing that. I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, this guy who rescued General Macarthur, drove across, I think it was like 600 miles of water,
right,
to rescue him. And I think the president at the time said, do whatever you can. They absolutely cannot capture General Macarthur. So it's just funny to see him do something like that. And then to hear about an 06 dressing up at night like a ninja and breaking into his installation is pretty cool. And then he just went on to obviously to make Vice Admiral. But that's interesting. I thought that was a cool opportunity. I think I'm pretty envious that you were able to meet people like that and take care of them, and that those later parts of life where we're not as good as we used to be, and that's pretty amazing. And to hear that humbleness, usually stays with all those people is pretty incredible. So you said you didn't want to talk about any Congress or senator stories you want to talk about?
No.
Okay. I had to try because there's a really good story, but I had to try at least. Yeah. So I got to go back to, so you're a urologist by trade. Mm-hmm. What got you into urology? What was
at that time? It was toys. It really was toys and technology. Okay. If you looked at any of the cancers that we had at that time in all disciplines, the best, most treatable and curable cancer was testis cancer. And at that time in my internship, before I even made a decision, I knew I wanted to be a surgical intern rather than a medical intern. During that time, you have to realize what we see the most of, and that is who gets testis cancer? Men under 35, and it's men, obviously. And who is the predominance in the military? Men under 35. And so we saw more testis cancer than most other facilities in the world, than all other facilities in the world probably combined. And so treating them and seeing them being taken care of and cured from their cancer in the high 80s, low 90s, high 80s then. And all the toys, I mean, we didn't have to always cut. And now, I mean, we were the forefront of laparoscopic surgery, ureteroscopy. All our instruments made it so that we could become less and less invasive in doing more and more practical things. So that drove me towards it. And then the research arm of it, because in my PhD, there were things that I wanted to do.
Sorry about that. My wife has come home, and you can hear the dogs. Everybody, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I love those dogs. Sorry to, but the reason I asked that is actually one of the comments we had is someone has a buddy whose work is at says that TJ, who is moving to Columbus from Walter Reed Urology right now. So he said they'll try to get you in touch. So I'm sure you.
Oh yeah.
John can put him to work. So you did your active duty 13 years, and then you decided to come to Columbus. What drove you to Columbus in particular, not Pennsylvania, being from there?
Yeah, I didn't really know what to do. I left the Navy, and you were tongue-in-cheeking me because you know why I left. I left because of congressmen and senators. I just couldn't take care of them anymore. They were just a very hard group of people to take care of. And they weren't like the typical senior military or junior military. That being said, as I did not know what I wanted to do, so I looked at academic centers. And I interviewed there, and then I looked at private practice small, private practice large, and then group medical practices. And I actually was going to take a position at the University of Kentucky. And then after meeting the staff there, which I knew most of them, one person actually drove me out of Kentucky as far as his attitude. And so I came here to Columbus, Ohio. I came to a practice which doesn't exist now. It was called COMG, Central Ohio Medical Group. And I joined that practice.
And you did that for a little bit until you had your own.
Right. It dissolved. And it was purchased eventually by Ohio Health, and then it dissolved. And then I started my own practice, and the rest is history.
Now, the question I had is, are you still practicing now, or are you completely?
No, I retired in 2015.
Yeah, I figured that's why I had the 15 written down. I didn't do that. So you enjoyed, but just imagine if you went to Kentucky, how big you are into bourbon.
Oh
now
my!
You could have it all right now.
Exactly.
The times you went, you could have had all the bourbon that you ever wanted, which is great. So when you came here, that's when you transitioned to become a reservist. So your life changed a little bit. You're back here. We've had a couple reservists on, or National Guardsmen on in the past. So you had the civilian life, and then on the same time you were deploying for ATs. One of the you know, there's a lot of places you went over those years, but I thought it was pretty interesting. You went to Naval Hospital Rota. In Spain, you went to Naval Hospital Okinawa in Japan, and then Naval Hospital in Guam in the United States of America. So, what on those deployments? What were you doing on those type of deployments?
During the day, I would see urologic patients, clinic, and surgery, and then at night we would do training. And I was the East Coast medical liaison for the SEAL teams, and so we would work with them and get not really with them, with their corpsmen, and get them up to par. And it was neat because they would almost all volunteer and go into the hospitals and the emergency rooms and into our surgical suites and learn our trade and get better and better at what they were doing. So there was very little downtime. Probably the only downtime I really ever had was at one time in Rota, Spain. It just seemed to be slower than usual.
Not a bad place to have some free time.
Exactly.
Spain. Never been there, but I've heard it's great. So those deployments, are you like, how long are those deployments when you're, or AT, they call it annual training? How long?
They're supposed to be 3 weeks, but a lot of them turned out to be a month or 6 weeks.
Okay. Did any chance to get Cindy with you? Did she ever go with you?
Never. She never did, because she was always home with Josh, Justin, and Jana. and she didn't go to any of my ATs.
We should just blame Josh. Most of us know Josh, so it's your fault, Josh. Your mom couldn't go to Spain because she had to stay here and take care of you.
That's right.
Jeez, ruin it for your parents.
Yes.
So we talked about it's interesting, like watching what you've done. I mean, I can't even imagine over 26 years, the how many people you've treated, and it's just amazing. When I read through it, it was kind of like reading a book, like a history book. You talked about talking, interviewing people about history. You've had a ton of history yourself and things that you've done. And so you came here, you eventually became the chief medical officer for, I always mess this up, at Naval. There it is. Naval. Yeah, there you go. The Navy and Marine Corps Center here in Ohio. And I think a lot of people, one of the things I thought about that and why I wanted to bring that up is I think a lot of people think, and the quote I brought up before is like doctors are immune to what a lot of people happen in the military. It's exactly the opposite. I think they're seeing, you see it in a different way. You see it in a different way that I couldn't do. My son is actually about to be a nurse. I couldn't imagine having to like tell a 34-year-old who is on top of the world that you have cancer and it's not looking good. I think that takes just as amount of courage that it takes someone to jump out of an airplane, go to the Ranger Regiment or whatever. I think that's pretty amazing. So how did you handle that? Like, for me, I personally don't know how I could tell someone that. Well, how do you deal with it? Does it ever get easy? Is it ever easy? Do you get numb to it? How does that work?
At first, when you do it, and this, I'm happy you did this segue into this, because at first when you do it, we're so busy that you're almost numb. But then when you have a chance to lie down in your bed, in your bunk, or on the floor on a cot, and you think to yourself, what am I dealing with? It's something that I never share with anybody, but this is how it is. You have a person that is active duty in the military and they're young, and they've been told through their basic training that they are immortal, that they're not going to die. And all of a sudden you're telling them, and they hear the big C word, and they think that they're going to die, and they might. But at the same time, you realize you've taken a person that's immortal, and then all of a sudden they are totally vulnerable. And it's really hard treating them as time goes on. And you really have to remove yourself from that situation, but very hard down the road. Whenever you're dealing with them initially, you have to stay on the path of where you're going to take care of them. But whenever you have downtime or you have a chance to think about it, it is tough. It really is. The ones that are wounded, they know what they were in it. I had mentioned that we were the post-injury day 3 at Bethesda whenever we had Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and you'd get horrific injuries and huge problems. And thank God there wasn't a million of them, but there was enough to keep us overwhelmed. And then taking care of them, they got removed into what are called medical hold companies, and you didn't get really a chance to see and talk with them. But our cancer patients, we followed them for 2 years, and they weren't allowed out of CONUS, out of continental United States, whenever they had cancer. So they were tough.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'm glad you said that. I feel like I didn't mean for it to go that way. It's actually, but I think it just ended up that way. Is that I think that's the same thing that we see right now with the epidemic, of why I started doing this podcast of us service members, killing ourselves at 22 people a day. I think we do at some point realize that we're not invincible, that we're vulnerable to everything. We're vulnerable to cancer. We're vulnerable to divorce. We're vulnerable to losing our jobs. I think you're right. We are for it to function and do what we need to do. And I think any service member, and I think what makes our military great is we are trained to believe that we're invincible, that nothing can happen to us. And I think there's definitely there's a cause and effect to that. And I think the effect is that a lot of us, we do still think we're invincible. I'm almost 50. I still can tell you I could go out and run 2 miles in 14 minutes. I'm never, it's not the truth. And I mean, I couldn't imagine having to do that. And it takes a ton of courage. And I really appreciate that, being able to have that courage to tell someone,
it's not easy.
That you're not invincible, and that, we're going to do everything we can. And we may not be able to do anything for it, which is pretty amazing. I really appreciate that, truly.
Thank you.
So I think it's good. I think you're almost finished with ready for another pour. Are we ready to talk?
I think we are. Yes.
I think we're time for our bourbon break. We're about at 30 minutes or so. It's time for a break. So you brought us tumbling dice. Not many people know Deadwood Tumbling Dice. So it's an 11-year straight bourbon whiskey. It's actually from Proof and Wood Ventures, which is out of Bardstown, Kentucky. They're just now in the process of building their own stuff, but mainly they source a lot of whiskey. So this is a source whiskey from MGP in Indiana. And for most of the people who listen, I think they know what MGP is. If you don't, MGP is known in the industry as one of the bulk providers of bourbon and rye whiskeys to a lot of very famous distilleries, as well as startup craft distilleries, which is what Tumblin Dice is. They kind of operate in that middle row of between like the major the major distilleries and the craft distilleries. And what they do, they have some brands. People that may not know the brand, they have DC Collection, which is kind of funny that this is what you brought, which is the Senator and Ambassador. They have, and they've also have some other ones like Tumblin Dice, the Deadwood series. So this is a 100 proof whiskey you brought. We don't know the mash bill. They don't disclose the mash bill, but it's kind of hard to. I kind of tried to look that up. It's really hard to do, but we do definitely know it's MGP. So very good. I've had them before, so we'll have a pour of that and enjoy that. But thank you. Perfect.
I mean, I like a lot of the MGP products. The first time I ever had one was probably the Bell Mead.
Okay.
And and I really enjoyed the Bell Mead, and they've dwindled down their barrels, and I'm sure that everybody would like to have Greg Metz's older barrels.
Yeah, so the MG, it's funny. Like it is funny. Like in the bourbon world, we try not to focus too much on the bourbon world because there's people who are like, I don't have any idea what you guys are talking about. But the bourbon world, MGP, there's the MGP, for lack of a better term, MGP whores. A lot of us love the MGP product, which is great. And like I talked about it real quick, but MGP is they are we'll talk about the second bourbon later on in the podcast. But there's different ways of how people are getting into the bourbon game. MGP has been key to doing that. They've been around before. Little people may not know they used to be known as Seagram's, the Seagram's Distillery, which is pretty cool. But the MGP stuff, pretty hot stuff. If you start getting into like the older 10, 12, older stuff like that, people go a little gaga for it. So thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
It is yummy. So you settled here. You're going to AT. You're leaving your family, the kids here in Central Ohio. You're going off to Guam, Japan, Spain. But at that time, you're actually building a pretty large private practice business here in Columbus, right? You talked about that. Share more about that with us, if you would.
Yeah, most urologists have probably 7,000 patients that are active, and whenever I retired, I had 23,000 active patients, and I saw them all. And something that's interesting is some people hide who they are and what they were. I never did. I let everybody know that I was a Navy physician, that I was going to be leaving throughout the year, and they were all fine with that. And one of the things that is the most amazing thing is disease is random. So you see people come into your office and wow, I'm leaving on Monday and today's Friday. And you see a person that comes in and they are passing blood in their urine. You get a CAT scan or an IVP, but at that time it was CAT scans. And you go, wow, you have a big mass in your kidney. You probably have renal cell carcinoma. You definitely have renal cell carcinoma, or there's a very rare benign diseases, but it's almost always cancer. And you need to go see one of my friends in the town. I'll only be back in 4 to 6 weeks. You need to get this taken care of. And what would happen the majority of the time, and when I say majority, 90+% is I'd come back, and where were they? They were my first person I saw in the office. They didn't have surgery by anybody else. I took care of them. And I always thought that was crazy. Even people with stones, and kidney stones are the most miserable thing on earth. And I always thought that it was probably one of the reasons I went through urology that I missed at first is problem resolution. Stone, take care of the stone, pain-free. Can't void, can't urinate, put in a catheter, they're your friend for life. And so that's part of why, why I went into it.
I don't know if I've ever said whoever gave me a catheter were friends for life. But
whenever you're in retention, it's as bad as a kidney stone, and they will be your friend for life. But, that's pretty much where most people lie.
I actually watched a major get a catheter at NTC one time, and I guarantee you, the medic that did that was not their best friend in the world. Afterwards, it was it was traumatic for all of us.
It's torture. Yes.
He made it though. He made it.
But I was just amazed people would wait.
No.
Wait for care.
It's funny. Like, I just think it's interesting. Like, my mom passed away from cancer. Tomorrow's her birthday. My mom was one of those cancer patients that did not get treated. I still don't know why. That's her decision. I'm over it. We've talked about it, but I still can't understand that. Like, my mom always taught me to like fight, but I get it as I get older. I feel like I understand my mom a lot more. I wish I could tell her that before,
No,
I never understood it then, but now as I get older, I can be like, hey, I want to go out on my terms. But I get choked up thinking that I don't know how I can tell someone that they have cancer, or, even if you think they're going to be okay. I think that takes a bunch of courage. I would actually like start crying myself. Like, I could start crying right now, even thinking like if you told me a story about somebody, because I don't know how I could ever, I would display no courage. They definitely would have went to a different doctor to be like, hey, while you're gone, I'm going to go see one of the other doctors because you have a problem. So to all the doctors out there, even the military, it's like, I think the military doctors, you guys get made fun of a little bit. You know what I mean?
Oh, we do.
Definitely do. And it's not a joke. I mean, I think they have some of the hardest jobs in the military. And I do, again, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate everything you've done, both for the military and for Central Ohio. It's pretty amazing. So we're going to get dark here a little bit, which is the segment that we're going to talk that nobody likes, but I think is important. So while you were here, one of your assignments as a reservist was the chief medical officer. We talked about it, the Naval and Marine Corps Reserve Center here in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio. And there's, for all the people that are military historians or know about it, or Ohioans that probably know that you actually were the chief medical officer that helped deploy Lehman Company, 3rd Battalion, 25th Marine Corps in 2005, right?
Yes.
And for many people who don't know, they're called Lucky Lima, and it's kind of a shitty name because they were super unlucky. They actually deployed with 180 Marines and corpsmen, and during that time they lost 23 Marines and 1 corpsman, so a total of 23 people killed in action. That's not even counting how many people wounded. But you talked to me about you actually were responsible for sending
all of them.
Sending all of them to they're I don't want to say it, but some people, and I'll share a story after you talk about it, but like sending them to some of them to their death. And then you actually were telling me, which I thought was pretty interesting, is there were a couple that you didn't let go, correct?
Yeah. And let me expand upon this story. Essentially, it was always in my life, there was always something going on. It never ended. And I'm not complaining because that's my job. And so I get a call from my first class petty officer, and he says, "Hey Doc," he says, "I really need you to come in." And I go, "Why?" He says, "Well, this weekend we're going to have in the military, in the Navy, at our reserve center, there's the blue side, that's the Navy, and then there's the green side. And on the green side, the Marines were going to get deployed. And so they were going to get deployed in early January, February. Nobody at that time knew when exactly. And so he called me and he says, "Hey, listen, I got all these guys you got to go through." He says, "I'm going to call you and Dr. So-and-so." I go, "Listen, I'm a machine. I can see all these guys. I really want to take care of them. I'll come in. Don't call the other doctor. I'll see them." So I saw them. And there's important points to this story that's just to this day hit a certain note. And that is, when I saw them, one of the things that is a criteria for them not being deployed is that they have high blood pressure, unbeknownst to them. They're all young, they're all healthy, but they're anxious, they may be wound, and they have high blood pressure. So I went through all these men and saw them, and I had a group of people sitting on the side that had high blood pressure, about 6 or 8. I can't honestly remember to this day, but there was a number of them. And as time went on, our protocol was that we would reassess their blood pressure at 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. And several of them the majority were able to go back and were able to be deployed. But 2 were not able to be deployed. Now, you would think that, okay, they're being deployed around Christmas. Right. They're leaving their families, that they would do anything they could not to go. Those 2 guys cried to go. They just cried to go. And it was just, looking back at it, they all went because of me. B is, I obviously was getting out in June of 2005, and this is when everything was happening to them. And and then one of them was my corpsman that went from the blue side to the green side with them. And one of them that didn't die, I actually operated on and did his vasectomy, but he really had significant injury to his brain. He had a closed head injury and never really fully recovered, which most of them don't. But just looking back at it, you think, oh my God, look what I just did. You asked me, I did my job. I did what I was supposed to do, but look what I did. And then it never really hit me until, I'm so sorry, I'm terrible with names, is that I was invited to the rotunda here at the Capitol whenever they were having the woman who did all the artistry of all of the men that died in Lucky Lima. And I was talking to her, and one of the corpsmen that was there came up and talked to me, and he sort of thought that who I was. You have to realize I aged, because this was only 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And my blonde is no longer blonde. It's gray. I get my hair cut only to get the gray cut off.
Always talking about hair on this
podcast. Yeah. But anyways, it was really neat to talk to two of a mother and father of two of the people that I sent in harm's way. And it was interesting. Brings a tear to your eye.
Yeah, no, and I kind of have a similar story. When I got off of active duty, I was getting ready to get out to do. I was at Knox. I was doing ACRC, and I was actually responsible for mobilizing a transportation company out of Michigan that went over to Iraq, and a few of them didn't make it back, and they had a rough go at it. And I still sometimes, I don't sometimes, I actually think about a lot. Is that whole thing was like, gosh, like, was I somehow, did I not do enough? Like, I guess it's different as a doctor, but did I not train him enough? Did I not do that? But it's like you said before, I think ultimately they all, like you said, those two Marines that didn't get to go. And there's one of our guests that is here right now that shook his head that understands the same way as that's not how we think. We would go in a heartbeat. And I couldn't imagine how those people feel about not being able to go. And then obviously what happened to them, what happened to their fellow Marines and corpsmen that they don't live one. I think, not to be dark about it, but I think we're not going to talk about any of them tonight, but I think since that time, two of the Lucky Lima Marines have committed suicide since then. So it's obviously something that is stuck with them and obviously with you. And all I would say is, like I always tell everybody, is you were doing your job. The two Marines that you didn't send, they're lucky. And I'm sure their family is happy they had high blood pressure. They may not be,
Right.
but everybody else is, which is always good. But so tying in, I have the questions. I have the mandatory questions that people want me to ask, and one of them. So is that your worst moment in the Navy, or do you have a worse moment than that?
That was probably one of my worst moments, and because of that, in my era, we got covers. They're not called caps in the military. They're hats. They're called covers, and we collected covers. But right before I got out, the master chief of that unit gave me a challenge coin for the unlucky Lima, and so I always carry the 325th with me almost everywhere I go.
Yeah, I was hoping if you were going to go worse than that, it was going to be bad.
Yeah. I don't
know if you want to go, but that is a bad. It's a good and bad moment. I mean, I think honestly they have to remember is, like you've said, I think you've seen some, Marines and sailors at their most vulnerable, and again, I think that's what makes our military amazing, to have doctors and nurses and corpsmen and medics that really actually truly take care of us. I mean, I still think of like the medics that were assigned to us, and they're amazing people. They generally have a care of their fellow, Marines, sailors, soldiers. It's pretty amazing. So now we got dark. So what's your biggest success in the Navy?
Oh, I think taking care of all the people. One of the things that makes Bethesda different was that everything's so intense, and and you just do your job, and you're so well trained. And I really believe I was and am. is that the complication rates for postoperative care is unbelievably small. It really is. And that's the part that I'm really the most proud of. I went into actual active duty military thinking that, oh my God, I didn't get into Johns Hopkins and this is really not what I wanted.
Thank God, I wish I joined the Army.
Yeah.
My dad would have let me join the Army.
Yeah.
It's always like,
and
for 26 years, you're like, God, if I had only been an Army doctor, just imagine.
And why I loved it is why I changed my mind totally was we rotated through Johns Hopkins. And when we rotate through Johns Hopkins, you find out that the only time that they get to see and operate on a person independent is it's a 6-year program, 1-year research, is the last 6 months of their career. Whereas the day I started Bethesda, I was a functioning active urologist or surgeon. There was nobody behind me. There was only me and the 4 walls. Even though we had people teaching us and with us, that's all who we had. And that made it so that our training was superb. I really do. You know, and if I dwelled on the question that you asked me, what were the bad times? You know, I'm sure there are many, and and you get to know these people, and they're part of your family. But at the same time, you just move on because I use the excuse of being so busy as an excuse. I really do.
Right.
Now, something that I didn't talk to you about, and I think is very interesting, but sad, is that every war that we have had, there is an encyclopedic volumes of what our war was like. And there's probably 8 to 10, 12 volumes. And after World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and I wasn't in long enough to see what happens with what came out of Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and the likes. Why I'm telling you this is during that time, you find whenever you read these, and I didn't read them to exhaustion, but I've looked through them, and there's nothing called PTSD. There's nothing called, the stress of what people go through now. It was ignored. And my initial training was whenever a person comes in and they have battle fatigue or what have you, we do something called 3 hots and a cot. And that's what we did. We put them right back in there. And that doesn't exist now. And you find that it is good to sometimes get them back into the saddle, so to speak. But my God, now we have, it had to exist then. And we just ignored it. And that we didn't have the statistics or people collecting data, but it's real. There's no doubt about it. 22 a day.
Yeah, I always think about that too. Like, it's funny, I came in 94, like we make jokes about it, but I don't remember anybody talking about PTSD. My dad's a Vietnam veteran, and obviously my dad, like anybody that's served and seen things like that. And it's not even just service members, it's, police officers. It could be someone that witnesses a car accident or is involved in a car accident. It could be anybody, but it's just funny how that was just something that, I think it wasn't something, it had to exist. It wasn't acknowledged. I think now, in today's world, it's acknowledged. I don't know if it's accepted. I still don't think it's really accepted in my opinion. I feel like sometimes people say
yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's funny to hear doctors say that. It's funny, and it kind of went to my next question. You and I didn't talk about this, but now you have the world has changed. I mean, you talk about the Vietnam veterans. A lot of them did one tour. Most one tour, didn't want to go. They went there. They came back. It had to affect them. World War II. Some people saw 2-3 years of combat. Now you're seeing veterans that have had 5 years of sustained combat. Sometimes even longer. It's crazy when you start looking at some of the deployments people have. How do you think our VA is doing as a doctor? And I don't think this is a political question, but how do you think they're doing taking care of us with the way that things have changed?
It sounds as though they're doing a much better job now than whenever I was in. Whenever I was in, I did 2 VAs, one in Washington, D.C. and one at University of Pittsburgh. And they were terrible. They really were. It was resident run. And I'm not saying I was obviously a resident, but there's hardly any staff there. The chief residents running the surgical suites and taking care of people. And the volume was such that you really couldn't take care of people with the manpower or women power that you had at the time. I'm praying that it's much better. The problem is in the physicians that I know in the VA, and you have to realize I don't know anybody for the last 5 years. They're not incentivized to take care of patients. They're not incentivized to work. And I'll give you an example. I had a dear friend, who went there with the belief that he was really going to take care of the patients. and he was seeing the patients. He was going down and bringing people up because there's no support. He'd bring them from the waiting room to see him in the office. And he was told that the clinic closes at 4:30. So he's seeing somebody in his office. He goes out of his office and can't get out of the clinic because everybody left and they locked him in. So that, for us, it never ended. We worked till we saw the last patient. And so that's the problem with the VA. And now the VA is, again, especially with PTSD, a lot of them simply don't evaluate the person with respect to an endpoint of getting them better. They just simply give them drugs.
Right. One of the things I've always thought about, and I'm not a medical professional by any means, but I always thought with the VA, last time I went to the VA was a long time ago, probably 15 years ago. And I it's going to take a lot for me to go back, actually. It just wasn't a good experience for me. But to me, I've always been like, why the hell isn't the VA run by, not run by, but manned by military doctors, medics? And I know that I just feel like those are the people that really understand you. Like I remember going in 2005 to get out of active duty, and I actually was told I had to wear hearing aids. Like I was issued hearing aids, and I think I was like 32, 34 years old. And like you hear that, and that's you talked about telling people they have cancer, but to tell somebody like, hey, by the way, you got to start wearing hearing aids. And when I told the doctor, how I thought, these things came about, I remember this being so just non-understanding of, oh my God, I remember her telling me there's no way that you were knocked unconscious for over a minute. There's no way. Like, did you wear your hair protection when you were in? And it was like, I was just flabbergasted. But like, don't you think the VA could be run better, or if it was manned by active duty or reserve doctors and medics and nurses that understand what we go through every day?
Oh, I agree. And there's something called the Manual for the Medical Exam, Medical Command, excuse me. And it's probably 800 pages long. And how many people in the VA have ever read it? How many physicians? None, zero, unless they came from the military. In the 1970s and 80s, the Pentagon decided that they were going to dramatically reduce the number of military physicians because we hold a billet, and you know how precious billets are. And so we hold a billet, and they decided they were going to start reducing it. So in my era in the Navy, we got rid of Naval Hospital Oakland, and we got rid of Naval Hospital up in Seattle, in Bremerton. And so all of a sudden, you now have only 3/5 of the physicians that you had before. And that was their intent. And look what just happened. We have Walter Reed, which is now Med-Hold, and Walter Reed's now moved to Bethesda, and those physicians join. But again, there's only probably at the most 5/8 of those physicians available. So yes, the answer to your question is the VA would be much better run by military physicians, because we know, we live, we breathe, we know what people have been exposed to, whereas the average non-military trained doesn't have a clue.
No, yeah, and I think that's one of the, like, I always feel like I feel like that's like I don't know, I feel like that's like black and white. Like every doctor I've ever talked to is like you talked about getting out of debt, like, you know what I mean, like somebody to like work them into that rotation where they understand it. That's the thing. I think, I 100% agree that the world, the medical profession, the VA, and I'm not going to get deep here, but they do care about PTSD. But I think there's a lot of it, like obviously something's still not right. There's tons of us that are on average 22 of us a day are killing ourselves. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I think I've always felt like my disconnection, it was 17 years ago. And I still don't want to go back. My dad and I argue about it all the time. Go back. I don't want to fucking go back there. They made me feel awful. They didn't understand anything that I'm coming from. And that kind of hurts. I just have to believe that. I mean, I'm not a smart man, but I just feel like that would be like a simple solution to help. And not even like, I kind of go back to like the West Point is like not even like having the whole place manned by military doctors, nurses, but to have like liaisons or someone that's there that can explain to them what's going on. They can walk out of an exam with somebody and they can say something that they would say to me or you, and they go, whoa, relax. You should understand this a little bit differently. I just feel like it could be done in a different way, and something has to change. And I think that's one thing that if I could be president for the day, that's what I would switch. I don't know if the president can do that, but that would
they
be
really
what I would
have
do.
to. They really have to incentivize them to work. And the best example I can think of within the last 3 or 4 years came up that makes this point is that in Phoenix or Tucson, I always get the two where the Veterans Administration is there. There's 5 cardiologists in the VA. Across the street, there is a cardiologist in his private office. He sees more than all 5 of those people combined. So that's why people are waiting in line, not getting their care. I'm using that as an example, but I'm sure if you looked at the volume of people they're treating, it's dramatically reduced. And so therefore, that doesn't give good care because of the wait.
Right. But I think it's interesting. What I know from the medical field, there's some things that like the medical, like you talked about coming on about becoming a urologist in the military because you had new toys and things like that. And I think that's interesting, but I also struggle with, my dad is it's like a VA, like we're MGP whores. My dad's a VA whore. That's what he knows. Like my dad is like, the VA doctor told me I got to do this. And I'm like, Dad, that VA doctor has seen a third of the patients. It could be like a tenth of what this person is saying. Like, and what's crazy is the way the military system is. My dad has to go through all of us have to go through a fucking loophole that makes no fucking sense, that we can't go see someone who has more experience that can help us. And that's physically, if it's cancer, if it's someone that's mentally, that's like dealing with this kind of shit, that's the kind of stuff that drives me nuts. It's like, you got to either find like the happy thing. Like if I want to go to your practice that still exists, because those people, we civilians can do it all the time. And their insurance covers it. It's just mind blowing. I can say, hey, I want to go to XYZ doctor. Like I'm getting late, I want to get LASIK or PRK. I'm going to go to the doctor. Am I going to the doctor that did it 5 times, or am I going to the doctor that did it 10,000 times?
Right.
And I feel like they force us into like, you're going to go that way, or like, and I don't want to get too like crazy about the VA and be VA hating, but I kind of do. Like, like same thing with medication. Like my dad has to drive from Columbus to Dayton to get fucking medication. It's mind blowing. My dad's in his mid 70s. What happens when he's 80 and he can't do that? They say, oh gosh, just give him the generic medicine. I just think, everyone wonders what's happening to us. That's, I think, the past like 10 minutes from a doctor. I think that something has to change. And I honestly, I think as service members, we own a lot of it because we don't talk a lot about how we feel, what we're going through, and we pretend like we're invincible, but the system is also failing us in a way. I think there's a better way to take care of us, and I don't think that's happening.
Well, not just the VA, but I think the whole system is failing. And why I say that is I read an article today. I actually showed my wife, I showed Cindy, that 1 in 5 physicians now that are practicing are planning on either A, retiring, or B, getting out of medicine. I don't know what they're going to go and do, but 1 in 5. And, you already saw, and you could hear my training, how long I was in training. What is the problem is and I'm not bashing nurse practitioners and physician's assistants, but they only get 1 or 2 years beyond the average person of training. And, my favorite thing to tell people is if I didn't know what was wrong with that patient within 3 minutes, they were either A, it was unbelievably complex, or they were lying to me. And so you know right away what's going on because you just saw.
You learn that from the military. It's like, I'm really sick, or I just don't want to go run.
Right.
Like
or they're lying to me.
I don't want a PT in the morning.
And so that plethora of people that know the field are leaving. I mean, there's no incentive to go into medicine anymore.
They're like, I'm super sick. I have a headache. I'm throwing up. I'm dehydrated. Did you drink last night? Oh yeah, I did. I drank 18 beers. Oh, that's what your problem is. That's great. Yeah, no, that's great. That's funny. So we talked about that. So one of the things I failed to bring up, and you gave me a reminder. So on top of all the things, you're building a huge super practice here in the Columbus area. Treating tons of patients. You and your fellow physicians, and you're at the same time a Naval Reserve doctor who's going on AT to Spain without your wife because of Josh. One of the other things that you decided to pick up was you decided to join the Honor Flight program here in Columbus as an assistant medical director. What drove you to, like, you got, big practice going on. You're in the reservists. You got, Josh that you got to deal with. I feel like your other two, your oldest are Justin and Janet, they weren't holding you down like Josh was.
Yeah.
But what drove you to decide I need to put more on my plate?
One of my favorite people on earth was a dentist that was here in town. His name was Bill Coleman. And he unfortunately died in a plane crash. And Bill had a partner that was in honor flights, and she's on the board at honor flights. And Lori talked to me whenever I was getting a dental appointment, and I thought, oh, this would be pretty good. And she said, Bill would do this, and that's all she had to say. And as soon as she said Bill would do this, I did. And it was wonderful. They really didn't have much medical expertise going on. They were bringing people. You have to realize how sick these people are.
Well, before we go, I didn't mean to cut you off. I want you to go, but I'm trying to be better because some people have said in the past that they don't know what we're talking about. So Honor Flight is a program where you fly to Columbus, you fly to major cities in the U.S. and they take veterans back to D.C. And it's a whole program where they actually take them to memorials. So sorry about that. That's what I didn't know if a lot of people I know what it is. I think a lot of people don't, but I don't. For the people that don't know, that's what Honor Flight is.
It's wonderful, and let me expand upon that a little bit more. Essentially, Honor Flight was founded by a physician assistant and a couple other people in this area.
Well, obviously, physician assistants are only 2 years more experience than the common person.
Out of Dayton, and he was a pilot, and he flew these people down, and that's what started Honor Flight. Now, out of Honor Flights Columbus, I believe there's over 100 cities that now have Honor Flights. And what we do is we take the World War II veterans, the Korean veterans, and then whenever I started, we were taking Vietnam veterans as a last resort. We wanted to take because there's so many dying per day of World War II and Korean veterans. That's who we took. And that was a real eye-opener for me because something we didn't talk about is whenever I was in the Navy, I was told never, ever, ever, ever wear my uniform. Why? Because I just got in 81, and people were still coming and had that memory from Vietnam. And whenever you talk to the veterans, especially the Vietnam veterans, they were treated totally different. When you came out of the World War II, what did you come to? A ticker tape parade. When you came out of the Korean War, same thing, even though nobody knew where Korea was. And then when you came out of Vietnam, you had someone throwing urine and spit on you and blood. And it was a horrible situation. And unfortunately, most of the commanding officers for those units that came back from Vietnam made their soldiers come back in uniform. And I was told never to be in my uniform, which was really sad because I'm very proud of my uniform. And that really was a problem. In speaking to those vets from Vietnam, because that's what's the majority, unfortunately, because whenever I was in, I did 14 of them. When I was in, the vast majority of the people that were flying were Vietnam veterans, and I got to meet them all because I would assess everybody that had certain medical conditions and talk to them. And it was a sad state of affairs on how they felt when they came back.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think it's like I think it always takes for granted, like all these people serve their country, whatever war is, and they came back and they went and lived in Nebraska, and they never left Nebraska. They stayed there, and the Honor Flight program is amazing because it takes them back to see these memorials that really honor their services. It's pretty amazing. And I feel really bad. Daniel was the first guest. He's actually still actively doing it. I feel bad about it. And then one of our guests actually just had said that they actually joined to help the Honor Flights this last week so they can help veterans, this is what the point of the whole podcast is however you can help. We all need help.
And you don't realize how much they need help sometimes. Yeah. Because whenever what we normally do is visit many other places, but World War II for sure, Korean War Memorial, and then right across the pond, the reflecting pond, is the Vietnam Wall. And it was amazing how many people, for instance, I got to take care of the sickest people, which usually meant that they were in wheelchairs. And a lot of times they would just simply tell me to stop. And I go, well, why do you want me to stop? He says, I can't go. This is as far as I can go. They couldn't go to see, their comrades that had died. Most of them had people that had died. And there's something called The Wall on an app on your phone, and you can look up the people they asked to, and then you can go to the panel and then make a write down and scratch on there the panel the name of the person that they knew. And it was really, really tough to take some of them through. And others were very excited to go through, even though they had lost. I mean, you see a smattering of all emotions there. That's the most emotion-filled part of it.
I'm going to pledge on here right now that I need to get involved in one of them here in the future because I got to go. Not as going there. If I wait too long, I'll be the old grumpy dude that they take.
You'll be eligible there.
So, but I do want to help because I think, I mean, I'm in that, like I said, like you have a brother who's a Vietnam veteran. My dad's a Vietnam veteran. It's like, you know, you start to see, like I had the honor to meet like a lot of World War II veterans. I wish I'd done it earlier. They're the most amazing people I've ever met. I got to meet a lot of them down the 82nd at All American Week, and just how vibrant and humble and just really fucking cool they were. It'd be good to go on a trip and just see someone that and help them, like that they haven't got. Like I've been fortunate enough to go to DC many times and see those things and be able to honor the people before me. And it's really huge for veterans to be able to have a chance. So if you can, whatever city you're in, if you're listening, a lot of people, you know, like are from the Ohio area, but if you're out there, if you have an honor flight program there, sign up, do what you can to help. It does make a difference to a lot of people. I think talking to Daniel, it's a huge deal. Are ready for another pour? Are you? I mean, Josh. By the way, Josh. I think it's Josh. So some of the names we can't tell who they are, but Josh was complaining that you actually took his brother to Spain and that you didn't take him.
On his 16th birthday.
Nice. That's because he likes it better than you, Josh.
That's right. Do you know how old you have to be in order to grab sherry off the bar? You don't have to be old, you have to be tall enough.
But Josh, he doesn't want to tell you this. He actually likes Justin better.
Yeah, that's right.
And what's interesting about Josh as an older brother, oldest, he have three, the Jays, Justin, Janet, and Josh. And we talked about carrying on legacy. I will say this: I'm glad my boys aren't going to the military. I'm okay with that. I'm actually happy about that. But Justin was in the Navy. Like
he was in the Navy. Mm-hmm.
You couldn't. You failed him.
No, he wanted to do it.
Josh, I had to be the best. It's not. I don't think you're too old. You can still join the Army.
That's right.
Your grandfather would be super proud.
Yeah.
No, but so he actually became. He was a cryptologist.
He was a cryptologist.
And so he's actually living in Hawaii now.
Yeah, it was his last duty station. He stayed, and we just got back. I think you know that.
Yeah, John was telling me how awful it was to spend a week in Hawaii in March. He did go get to the beach, but he's just hanging out with his grandkids.
It was great. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Cool. But he does like you better, John. He does like your brother.
I'll say that. I agree.
See, you wanted me to make fun of your dad, but it's on you now.
Yeah.
So, we'll go to our second whiskey. So we talked about now. We'll talk about a little bit of whiskey. So you actually brought us the Tumblin Dice, which is actually MGP sourced for a startup distillery. I'm drinking. I already poured some of it, so
it's good.
I'll pour some more. The second whiskey we're going to feature tonight is actually Opa Grill and Taverns Hotel Tangle single barrel whiskey that was picked in 2018. This is a little bit different than. This is a startup distillery, kind of like the folks that are doing with Tumblin Dice, but they actually age their own whiskey. So there's two for the people that want to learn about whiskey. If you're starting a craft distillery, there's two ways to do it. You distill your own and wait for 2. So I guess it's like 2, 4, 6, but before it gets old enough, or you buy source whiskey from MGP or other places, and you sell those until your whiskey comes available and it's good to drink. So Hotel Tango is pretty interesting. And why I wanted to feature that today is Travis, who started Hotel Tango, is actually, I don't know if it's officially, but it's the first combat wounded veteran distiller. Travis is a Marine who served 3 tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Unfortunately, dealt with some post-traumatic stress disorder, which you talked about, also TBI, and he actually left the active duty. Once he left active duty, he went and I was actually fortunate enough to meet him a few years ago, became a lawyer. And it was funny when you talk about being humble. He was like, yeah, I became a lawyer, and then I decided that I wanted to start a distillery, and I just decided to start a distillery. So like, yeah, I'm a highly decorated Marine. I just went to law school, and now I want to start a distillery. But it's pretty funny to hear him say it's really not you're like, this guy needs to get a publicist because he's not doing but it's doing well. But Hotel Tango is actually named. He's married to a lady named Hillary. So Hillary and Travis started it. So Hotel Tango is actually military phonetic for hotel, which is Hillary, and Tango, which is Travis. One we're drinking right now is actually the first barrel pick they ever did outside of Indiana. It's the only barrel proof they did until recently, which is not their juice, and it's MGP, which we talked about, which you have on the counter. But the whiskey we're having tonight right now is 6 years old. Its mash bill is 25% corn, 21% wheat, and 4% malted barley. So it's pretty yummy. It's a cool one. And what was cool about this pick is we actually got to go and fellow veterans and picked in 2018. And we actually had a Korean War veteran with us at the time. I think Bill was either 89 or 90. He unfortunately passed last year. So it was really cool. We had we didn't have a Vietnam vet. We had a Korean War vet. We skipped over Vietnam. We had Desert Storm, 2 Desert Storm vets, Iraq, Afghanistan. So it was pretty cool. Pretty special bottle. Pretty good stuff. So kind of why I chose that bottle for myself is that John had brought a bottle that is, source whiskey from a company that's sourcing. And then you have a company right now that when they started off, they actually used their own whiskey and aged it before they brought it to market. So it's pretty cool. Hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
Yes, cheers. Thank you.
So I think I'm looking here. I've had all these questions. I think we've hit it. A lot of the stuff. The only thing we have to get on is you consider yourself a pretty sweet handyman. So
I do.
If I ask Cindy and Josh, you can come down here. You can help me get the floor down to some hardwood floor, make my wife happy. So what got you into that? Is that how long ago have you been doing that? Is that from the days of the farm? Or?
Yeah. I always tell people whenever I see someone that doesn't have any common sense, they either didn't grow up on a farm or they didn't have a father or someone teach them in the garage. And that's really where you learn the basics. Coming to Ohio, and by the way, one of my patients told me there are no O's in Ohio. Of course, she was from Southern Ohio. Whenever I moved to Dublin, and I don't know, the increments of monies in Dublin's are $1,000 bills. And so if you wanted something fixed, it's $1,000. If you want this fixed, it's $1,000, maybe $3,000. And so I figured I've saved well over $100,000 by doing the things myself. And I've continued that until recently. And really, there's not much I won't take on and have done in the past. And now with the internet, Jesus, I'm pretty fearless.
Yeah, I feel like now with the internet, if you research enough, you can be I feel like I could be a urologist right now. I can just look on that, man.
Kidney's
the right
easy.
Tools, I can figure this out. I'm
make a little nick and you got it.
How do I give myself a vasectomy?
And it's been done. It's been attempted. Yeah, I know.
That is scary. I
know.
I feel like you got to be one hard
it's
SOB
been attempted,
to do that.
Yeah.
I don't. I would love to be the person that was like, "Hey, what are you in here for the emergency room?"
Yeah.
I tried to give myself a vasectomy.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
But was it? I mean,
no, I know exactly. It's true though. It's amazing what people do themselves.
So you're an outdoor guy. You talked about like scuba diving for lobsters. So what's your favorite thing? You have a favorite experience like fishing, hunting? You were killing deer at 8 with a knife, jumping out of the tree.
No,
I feel bad. I've never been hunting.
Yeah,
ever in my entire life.
Well, where I'm from, there's no G on hunting. It's hunting. It's hunting. Yeah. Probably, I honestly, I did a course called C4 Combat Casualty course in Texas, in San Antonio, and there they taught us how to belay and how to rock climb and what have you. And so I really started to really love the climb and hike. And my favorite thing to tell somebody is that I've actually once hiked in one day around a mountain, but that's why I have my right hip done, my left hip done, and my right soon to be done. But I love the hike, but I really like rock climbing. We bought a cabin in Kentucky, and that was our point, not only to get bourbon. And
that's what I was going to say, guys. He's like, look.
Yeah.
He's doing that to rock.
Yeah.
He's really down there. So him and Josh have a hub to go bourbon hunting down in Kentucky. So he's like, but they're going rock climbing.
So I didn't start drinking till I was in my late 40s, early 50s. Never. And I started drinking wine and I started collecting in '92, and I have a cellar. But my bourbon story goes back to the first time I was in. We bought our cabin in 2004, and we decided, wow, there's these bourbon, there are these distilleries all over. So we went to Buffalo Trace, and while we were there, we had a good time and talking to people. I go, what should we go and buy? He said, well, we can't buy it here because we have to first sell it and bring it back.
Right.
So he says, just go up here and you can get good things. So I went up on the hill, and what was the first thing they had? Pappies.
Right.
And you could buy Pappies then. It was just on the shelf. It wasn't a duster. It was probably a duster. And so that was my first experience with bourbon and Cindy's as well. And so I bought like 8 bourbons, never drinking bourbon, anything other than wine in my life. And by the time we were done, she's going to kill me for saying this, but my wife didn't know her name. We tried all 8.
It's Cindy.
It's Cindy, yeah.
No, I'm kind of envious. Like, I know, like, we're making jokes, like, with Josh. Like, some people know who Josh is, some people don't, but it's your son. He's huge into bourbon like we are. And my dad actually hates whiskey with a passion. Like, my dad won't touch it. He'll occasionally have a beer. It's always been that way. So I'm kind of envious that you and Josh have that, like bond to be able to sit down and drink. Although Josh, I'm going to keep throwing Josh on the bus. He's like, my dad rates everything 8.5. Like, he was getting on you for a hard time.
He does. That's so true.
Yeah, but like, dude, you can like whiskey.
Right.
I mean, like, what's wrong with the
Right.
8.5 scale? There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I mean,
I do. I rate things, unfortunately, probably higher than most people. There are definitely things that I hate. And the trouble is we collected only, it's like in my cellar, I have almost everything I have, even though some things I have never tasted are highly rated by somebody else.
right.
And so it's hard to split peas there. And same thing with bourbon. Josh has been the driving force for us collecting bourbon. And so there's not much that's not taste proof to that.
Yeah. I love the story about like living in Kentucky, because I was stationed at Fort Knox, and I remember one of the favorite things I remember, like, one night we were at the Class 6, and I was at the time I drank Maker's Mark a shit ton and Knob Creek and all the cheap stuff, and I was like, man, I'm gonna like treat myself, and I like all this Pappy was there, and I remember grabbing a bottle of Pappy 23, and like, I'm gonna buy this, and like I was like, how much is this? And it was like $219 or like something like that. And I remember grabbing it, and I remember asking the clerk, like, how much is it? And I was like $219. And my wife was with me. She's like, you're not fucking spending $219. And I'm like, who the fuck is spending I'm like, I'm not spending. And I put it back. And and my sons asked me like a while ago, my boys are older, but they're like, what can you do if you go back in time? And like, I think they're like, sometimes looking for this that deep answer of like, I'm going to go back. Like, maybe I won't, I was like, I would go back and totally get a sports almanac, like in Back to the Future, and I would buy all of the bourbon when it was cheap. I would have been like, all those Pappies. I would have been like,
well,
and I'd be like, hey guys, guess what? That's paying for college. It'd be great. But it is interesting to hear those stories about it. But sure, he's down there for rock climbing. Someone says they want to go rock climbing. I'll go rock climbing with you, which is code word for I want to come down to Kentucky and go bourbon hunting with you.
But I didn't then. And as a matter of fact, the bourbon that I bought, the Pappy I bought, was a Lot B. The other ones were there, but I thought they were too expensive. They were just there. And that's the world. I mean, if you look in the last 3 years, I mean, I've been doing this with Josh 5-ish now. Right. I mean, the bourbon hunting and collecting is becoming much hard.
Very hard. It's fun. We talk about, like, you have the relationship, like being able to drink. My dad used to be pre-COVID, and the people that know me, my dad was like a super hunter. He's like my mule. My dad, I could send you've met my dad. Yeah. Like I've been like, Dad, go there. And like Josh is like, telling John, go there. Like, I mean, and you guys probably made it together and were like, that's how it works. But the interesting thing is you actually drink. My dad does not drink it. My dad has a huge thing. And he even said before, like, the game has changed so much about going there. And like, actually the time, it's funny. Like, it was always interesting when my dad was big into hunting, he would like, someone would be like, oh, I met your dad. And I had this, like, my dad talked to you for an hour. And now I don't think anybody's really talking to anybody. They're just like, give me the bottle. Mm-hmm. Let me, take a picture of it and sell it for max profit. So, but I am envious of yours and Josh's ability to enjoy whiskey. I think whiskey is a huge brings a lot of people together. People have different philosophies, different beliefs, and it's a core thing to bring a lot of people together, and that's what I love about it. So I think we've covered everything. I think we have. I mean, we could keep going. I could probably get the book out and look, more that you've accomplished a lot. And like I said earlier in the interview, I'm truly honored and humbled to have you on here. I think it's amazing. I'm pretty guilty of making fun of military doctors throughout my career, and it's not a joke. It's not a joke to make fun of the nurses, the medics. You really what keep us going, physically and mentally. And I thank you for your 26 years of service. And so we're going to get to the final part that we always do is we're going to, I decided after talking to you about Lucky Lima we've already talked about it. I don't want to talk about it further, but we're going to go to the point of talking about another fellow service member, a Navy SEAL who fought the fight overseas but lost it at home. So we'll talk about Navy Special Warfare Operator, First Class Ryan Larkin, 29 years old. Ryan passed away in April 23rd, 2017 from what we talked about, which is, it's funny how things that we talk about we don't, but it was actually not diagnosed TBI injury. His dad is actually pretty hardcore right now about his son not getting the proper treatment, and it was undiagnosed. And so Brian was born in 1987. He was raised in Maryland. In 2006, Ryan enlisted in the Navy, volunteering for the Navy SEAL Challenge Program. He received his Navy SEAL Trident in 2008. He trained as a Special Warfare Operations Medic, which I thought was pretty cool. I didn't even know. I pulled this out before we even talked, which is pretty cool. And a Naval Special Operations Sniper. Ryan had 2 combat deployments in Iraq and 2 deployments to Afghanistan, along with some other missions to Lebanon and Honduras. Over his military career, he was awarded the Bronze Star Army Commendation and Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medals with Valor. And Ryan received his honorable discharge in 2016 and was actually pursuing his degree in mathematics when he passed away. Ryan loved playing music, enjoying the arts and sciences, boating, shooting, and outdoors, which is kind of funny how it ties into you being a guest tonight. He's survived by his father, Frank, who's actually a former Navy SEAL, who's actually been pretty vocal about his son since he's passed, and about the type of care and things we talked about that they need, and also his mother Jill and his sister Kelly, and he actually had a service call in Copic that he did. So here's to Ryan. Sorry, Ryan, we miss you. And again, for any veteran that's listening, or any other person that listens that thinks a veteran needs somebody to talk to, you can always give me a DM, but more importantly, you can call the professionals at the Veterans Crisis Hotline at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1, or you can text 838-255. So thanks again, John, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. It's always amazing you're in that same thing with Vice Admiral Buckley. It's like talking to somebody is like living history that you can't get back unless you talk to people. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. We'll see you in a couple weeks, and have a great night.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Appreciate it.